Now I could do literally not 10x, like 100x more than I was able to do myself before. And I'm not worried at this point about losing my job. We now have a technology that can do what we ask it, but it requires us to actually know how to have that conversation. And that's a very human skill. It's very much a soft skill. It requires emotional intelligence. Everybody wants to feel the joy of being amplified by technology. Like everybody, I've never had a single person be like, whoa, that's not good. I have a Google alert that says AI gone wrong. It's similar to probably your show that you have.
TDW fans, we are excited to share our amazing guest with you today, Noelle Russell. Noelle is Microsoft's MVP in AI, Accenture's global AI solutions lead, and the founder of the AI Leadership Institute. Now, we love this conversation because it's inspiring. It's all about the goodness and the heart of generative AI, not all the fear-mongering that you see in the media. And it's with a diverse thought leader who is over the moon about the potential of this world-changing technology. Now, Noelle's brand is literally I Heart AI, and she's often seen wearing those shirts when she does speaking engagements. And we are thrilled to share that we're helping Noelle launch her I Heart AI challenge on Valentine's Day on school.com. Now, imagine you got to grab a cup of coffee with Noelle and talk about a wide-ranging conversation. It's like everything from why everyone should be using generative AI, how you can get 100x productivity gains, why it can help you amplify nearly anything that you do, how to use it to get more time with your loved ones or break through your limiting beliefs, and how to not make AI your competition, how to overcome bias in AI, how to train it better, why some companies make bad choices with AI, and so much more. That list could go on and on. This is an amazing episode. We are so grateful to have her on the show, and let's dive in. Noelle Russell, welcome to TDW.
Thanks so much for having me. Super excited to be here.
It's amazing to have you on. Yeah. So you have had an incredible career, and your personal journey is remarkable. You're a diverse woman, and you've broken barriers and overcome challenges to become a top speaker and thought leader in AI. Tell us about your origin story, your mindset, and how you're able to shatter all those limiting beliefs that may have crept in along the way.
Yeah, I probably would say I'm pretty lucky in the sense that I grew up, in a house where my dad was a Buddhist Christian kind of guy. And so he introduced me to meditation very early. Little did I know how valuable that would be in my life. But a lot of people are like, oh, you're just naturally happy. I'm like, I don't know if I was born happy, but I definitely was introduced to the idea of happiness is a choice very early in my life. And so I've always been the one who's like, if I'm going to be, I have a motto that I say is like, be the most positive person in the room. And so I always when I walk into a room, I'm like, I choose to be kind of a personified happiness beacon, if you will. But that being said, my journey kind of started, and I was also at a very young age, I was introduced to science fiction. I've always been a huge fan of science fiction. My dad introduced me to, the first book we read, or series of books we read together as a whole was the Foundation series. And it's not for children, by the way, but it was very good. I've read it a dozen times since then, with him. But I didn't realize it when I was reading it, but it definitely was planting seeds in things that I now realize I did very similar, career work, driving towards outcomes that I envisioned as a kid, of being able to have this symbiotic relationship with technology, being able to talk to it like they're a member of the family. And honestly, today in my own house, we have tons of, technology that we can talk to that literally is like a member of our family. It makes our announcements for dinner. It reminds someone of taking pills. It's extremely integrated into our lifestyle. And all of that in my mind, I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, that really did start when I was a kid and I was reading these stories, and I was one of those very imaginative kids that I got lost in books. I was a nerd. I liked to read. I liked to be in libraries. And so it's maybe ironic, but certainly very fortuitous that I got to do a lot of the work in that same field that I ended up dreaming a lot of dreams as a child.
That's fantastic. And you have carried that happiness forward in a way that you're giving it back now through all of your work. And it's infectious. In fact, when Alex and I met you at PodFest last year, we were experiencing that. We were like, this woman is beaming to talk about something that's a really tough conversation. So it's resonating. It feels good.
Yeah, it's an incredibly exciting time, even with the dangers and the concerns. I always tell people I'm rationally optimistic. And it's because I know the amazing good things that could happen with this technology while understanding the kind of guardrails I need to keep in place or remind executives to keep in place in order to do it safely. And that's a really good place to be, right? Like not to be not to be driven by fear, but to allow it to protect your enthusiasm and moderate your enthusiasm. And I think, if I was left to just be enthusiastic, it might be too much for people to take. But I'm tempered by wisdom of like what could go wrong. And I do a lot of planning around that.
It's good. Speaking of breaking through barriers and limiting beliefs, there are a lot of limiting beliefs out there about AI. People are struggling with personal limiting beliefs, and there's organizational limiting beliefs too. And I'm going to throw a couple of them out. From the personal side, I'm not great with tech. I'm not a coder. I don't really understand AI and how it works. But on an organizational side, there are leaders and people inside of organizations saying, hey, we're not Google. We're not super innovative. That's not our bag. So there's this stuff getting in the way that's very human stuff. How can people shift their mindset about that and lean in to generative AI?
I think the biggest challenge I have found is a very maybe simple word, tinker, like the ability and willingness to just play around with technology. I found, at least initially, it was very generational. Like my dad is not going to press a button. He doesn't know for certain what's going to happen as a result of that button being pressed. Like he won't just press it. And I am exactly the opposite, right? Like if I see a button and I can't tell what it does, I'm like, immediately press it. It's hard for me not to press it, actually. And I feel like that's part of the world has to kind of transition from, I need to know exactly what's going to happen in processes, standard operating procedures, like all of these things that we've trained ourselves to do, to be very methodical in our approach. And again, it's not that we have to completely dismiss that, but we do have to shift our mindset to an opening for curiosity and to embrace, like there was a time in our lives when we were much younger where we did things without knowing the exact outcome or consequences. And we learned by doing that. And I think that's why one of the things I always enjoy doing when I get in front of even executives and even executives in industries that they themselves have said the things that I just heard you say, right? Oh, well, we're not technologists. I often hear companies say we're laggards, like we're the ones who always go last, almost as a badge of honor. And I'm like, okay, sure. But today we have to think a little differently. So I would, rather than put up a slide presentation, I would be like, let's play a game. Let's get in front of a generative model and just ask some questions that you already know the answers to. And what ends up happening is that when I show versus tell, they start to get excited and they themselves start throwing out different ways for me to ask that question. And I'm like, this is all the new world is asking you to do, is to think outside of what you would typically do and get excited and allow that momentum to drive new ways of thinking. And this AI will just help amplify those new ways of thinking. But most people won't even ask the first question. And that's, I think, the big, pivot that I'm helping organizations make today.
There are a lot of people that are worried about being disrupted or replaced by AI, right? And there's a reasonable concern here. It's going to have a lot of impact across industries, workflows, roles. You're seeing it, we're seeing it. There's this increasingly popular quote that you won't be replaced by AI, but you will be replaced by someone who uses AI. What's your take, and how do you approach this at work, with your audiences, and with your clients?
I mean, I have a very personal experience with this because one of the things I struggled with over the last 5 years, I like creating content. I like, sharing things about myself. I like, telling people, oh my gosh, I was just in the city, and I like creating lots of different slices and ways for people to engage with me. But doing that work as a solopreneur or as a single person doing like, I don't have time. And so over the last 5 years, I've had like diminishing returns. I could not get enough content out there to really make a difference. And one thing I saw almost immediately with this technology was that as this person who I have a full-time job, I have a family, I have a brand I'm trying to build, I'm trying to educate a community on AI, I had very little time. And in this moment, I actually was able to use a generative tool. Now, granted, I use ChatGPT. I use the pro version, so I pay for it. But when I was able to give it custom instructions, when I was able to custom train it on my voice and how I talk and what I care about, on my core values and how I want it to respond, I spent a lot of time training this model on who is Noelle. Now I could do literally not 10x, like 100x more than I was able to do myself before. And I'm not worried at this point about losing my job or like losing certain tasks that I do every day going away. I was able to amplify, grow, build a larger funnel, attract more audience members in different diverse backgrounds and different educational backgrounds. I could talk to people like they were in second grade or talk to them like they're academics. Like all of these things became accessible to me. And I find a lot of people when they first approach this technology, they might even ask it a question and it doesn't respond very well. It doesn't sound like them at all. And they don't realize that just this tiny little pivot to invest in technology, and this is true across the board, when you invest in technology and you train it, you make it an expert on you, how you think, whether that's you individually or you as a business, it now gets exponentially better at doing things that you can only, like your scale is capped at how many humans you currently have, how fast they can work. And this becomes an amplifier for that. So I absolutely think everybody wants to feel the joy of being amplified by technology. Like everybody, I've never had a single person be like, whoa, that's not good. Like everyone says, well, that's not terrible. Like they actually are surprised at how good it is. And I think people, as they start to use it, will find that it's exciting to be able to achieve your potential in ways that was really hard to do even just a year ago.
Yeah, it's so interesting because people really are, a lot of folks are really prevented from diving in because of this fear-based mindset. They just don't want to put a toe in the water and they don't understand, hey, this is going to enhance your human superpowers and give you new superpowers and make more time for you for what matters most.
Exactly.
And that
and
story
Bill Gates
is not
said
being
very
told
similarly.
enough.
Yeah, he said the same thing. He's like, what happens in a world where we actually have time to sit down with our families for dinner, where we actually don't need to be on the phone all the time? Like we went through this really, I think, tough part of, when COVID happened, where we were on 24/7. Like we were on our computer, connected to our phone. There was no separation between work and life. And I think this technology has come at such a critical time where we as humans need to build that separation. And now we're going to have literally the ability to amplify tasks that we no longer have to do. So that option is there. Now, the danger is having leadership that fill that time with more stuff, right? Or being a workaholic, right? Or an individual who fills that time with more stuff. But the reality is that and Bill Gates said it best in one of his notes on LinkedIn. He was like, we're in a time where if you have the emotional intelligence and like the self-awareness, that you can actually create space where space was not possible before and still achieve not just the same outcomes, but better outcomes. And that emotional intelligence of being like, now I'm going to take this time for me. I'm going to, it's going to take the same amount of time to do the work because I'm going to take time to think now, where before I was just go, build, build, build. And I think that's going to be a hard transition for most because we're going to feel like, wait, I don't want to, if I'm not growing, I'm dying, right? If I'm not building, I'm, decaying. And I think that mindset really has to shift a little bit in a world where AI can complement our activities.
You are incredibly productive. Are you seeing that in your own life? Are you seeing that you're getting some breathing room in spite of all the things that you're doing, which, I mean, your output is prolific.
So I definitely see the breathing room. But I am one of those people every morning, my husband and I we're big planners. So we plan our morning out every morning. And I believe in not having any white space on my calendar. And that doesn't mean it's filled with a meeting or filled with an activity. But I have now, when I go through, I'm like, oh, I used to schedule 30 minutes to put a post together. Now I can put 5 posts in that 30 minutes. So imagine these 5 blocks or 6 blocks that I used to have are now condensed into a single block. So now either, again, I can choose to do more. And some days I will tell you, I always say I don't achieve work-life balance. I'm more a harmony girl because it will be a virtuous cycle. I might spend all day Sunday building content, but now I can build out content. I mean, I just use bulk create in Canva with the help of generative AI. And I was able to create 25 videos in a half an hour period, all with different backgrounds, different texts. Like I was like 25 videos. And then I published them into my scheduling, my content planner that will now auto schedule them. So people always ask me, oh my gosh, how are you everywhere all the time? It seems like you're posting from different cities all the time. And I'm like, well, technically I did that last week or last month. And this is just the scheduled post that's happening. And so, yeah, 100%, I see these windows of opportunity to now condense the amount of time I spend building content, in one area. But also, I mean, I do the same thing in my job, writing PowerPoint presentations. All these times take less. What I've done though, is I still put the block in my calendar because I want to be able to reserve that time for thinking. And I'll just put thinking time or break or walk outside. I've never used to walk outside in the middle of the day ever. And that's sad truth. I'm being very vulnerable with everybody. But now I keep those blocks that I've now saved and I'm like, you can go outside now. Like just spend 15 minutes. And I'm hearing all this benefit of, taking your shoes off and walking in the grass and grounding yourself in the earth. And it works for me. Like it provides me clarity. So when I come back, I can work even more effectively. And I think the other benefit is the creative side of what I do. Like in the past, I would just kind of regurgitate whatever I was doing that week. Now I get all these incredible ideas because I have time to let my mind just wander. And I think you'll hear we'll talk about some of these ideas later in the show, but it's just fascinating what happens to the human brain when you give it space to think. And I don't think many of us have had that opportunity. And I do think it's something that employers need to realize the benefit of. Some have, Google, for example, and Facebook, Git and Meta, give their employees this time. But everyone else is going to realize this type of AI is going to now make it easy. Like you're not going to be hurt by this. But will companies do it? I think a 1984 mindset of workforce management is going to say, oh, you gained 40 hours this week? I think we should fill that with pipeline development or more contacts or more calls.
Yeah.
And that's going to take a certain type of leader.
I want to nerd out on this just for one more second, because I think people are going to be fascinated by how is Noelle Russell using AI in her personal and work life. Are there any other tools that are your go-tos? Is it ChatGPT? Is it Claude? What are the other tools that you're using? Have you created a personal GPT when you were talking about teaching AI more about you to interact with you in a more authentic way? Tell us just a little bit more so our audience can get all this value from you.
Oh, goodness. Yes. So exciting. So the first thing I do use ChatGPT Pro version. So I upgraded and pay the monthly subscription. I use that every day. I have it as a shortcut on the homepage of my cell phone. Really almost, I don't know, dozens of times a day I use it. I would never just write something without being like, so the other day I'm writing a new book and I already had the idea for the title. I've known the title for a long time. And then I went to ChatGPT and I was like, hey, can you look at the last, 15 bestsellers in this technology space with, in alignment with the category I'm going to be in, and would take my title and make it sound like the other stuff that's already sold and become a bestseller. And it tweaked it just a little bit. And I was like, okay, that's not terrible. Because I have always said this to people. I'm not the namer of things. That's not my core skill. I don't really care that much about it. But this name I got, I was like, all right, that's pretty good. So that's going to be, it's one of 4 or 5 that I'm giving the publisher as ideas. But But I didn't just say, create me random names, right? I said, I already have a name and I already have an idea of what I want to do with it. Help me get there. And again, that's the definition of amplification. Help me do more with what I already have. And that's where I've seen the biggest. So ChatGPT Enterprise or Pro, 100%. My whole family uses it. So we actually have a team edition. That being said, we also, I use Poe.com because Poe aggregates. I love the features of this tool because it aggregates a bunch of models together. And the benefit of that is that, let's say I get an answer from ChatGPT and I'm just like, well, what happens if I ask Claude or I ask an Anthropic model or ask an open source model? And I just want to see some diversity of how these models are reacting. It's very exciting for the researcher in me. So I use Poe, and Poe also embeds more than just one model. ChatGPT, you're stuck with what the model they give you. With Poe, you can choose, like maybe I want to add a large PDF of content that I wrote 2 months ago or 2 years ago, and I want to use that as context. Well, on ChatGPT, there's limits to how much content you can feed it at any given time. But when you move over to Poe, there's, a 32K version. There's, a 64, I think, or 124. I can't remember, but there's additional options to get what you need done. And then to round out the last thing, I did actually create on character.ai, which was one of my first. I always go to my kids and I'm like, what AI are you using right now? And it was one of the first tools that my kids told me they were using, character.ai. And I was like, what is this? It now actually is integrated into Amazon Alexa, which is another one of my favorite AI tools. We use it also every day.
And you've built hundreds of applications on Amazon Alexa, by the way, for folks listening. Yeah.
That's right. Hundreds. And many of them are still, like, I get a couple million users for a handful of these skills. Like a couple million users still. I can't believe it that people are still using it, but I'm glad to hear it. But in character.ai, I created Nearly Noelle, and I've actually created a bunch of bots, but that's my favorite. And I've had my friends, or no, I shouldn't say that. My children, their friends, like other 11th graders, other 7th graders, have gone to my kids and said, "Hey, I talked to your mom's bot and asked them a question, and here's what they said." And they would send me a picture of it, and I'm like, that's so awesome, because that is exactly what I would have said to you if you asked me. And it's about responsible AI and inclusive engineering and how to survive as a diverse voice in tech. And it's just fun because I would not ever be like, they're all on these custom Discords and doing all this stuff. I'm not going to be there as a human, but it's awesome that what I think and how I think and the type of questions I would answer and how I would answer them is accessible now to this whole new demographic of people. So creating new vehicles and new modalities for people to engage with the way that I think is fascinating. I just wish more people would do it, because I'm always like, man, if I could get in your brain and ask you questions, but may not have time to answer those, but I could talk to your bot. And that's what I think the interesting part of the ChatGPT store is, giving us the opportunity to do just that, which is kind of exciting.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I want a Nate bot.
Yeah, right. Noelle, you said something that put me on stop. And we were talking recently, and you called generative AI a soft skill. And no, I'm not kidding. My brain went, I don't think she can say that. Is that right? How is she saying that? What does that mean? My brain was like caught in this battle, because tech has always been called a hard skill, right? It's this often physical thing or software thing. It's very technical. And now you throw generative AI in, or AI as a larger bucket, and it's sophisticated, it's rare, it's complex, and talent is scarce, right? So when you said that to me, I was like, hang on, we have to talk about that. Tell me more about your thinking behind generative AI is a soft skill.
So one of the things that I have done is I've had the, luxury or benefit of being able to travel all over the world and talk to executives. And that's one of the new things about AI now, as opposed to 10 years ago when I was on the Alexa team. One of the things now is that business is often driving the conversation on how do we use this stuff. Like the business executives, leaders are realizing, hey, there's value here. And they're the ones driving the development, driving the implementation, which is different than before, where it was kind of tech and research saying you should use this, and business being like, I don't know what that's for. So now business is like, hey, I could just ask a question and this tech can answer it for me. I love that. And so now I'm happily in this room where people are excited to use AI. And I realize that the interface for using this AI, of course, is their voice. And what I instantly uncovered was that we don't have really good experience unless you're good at this, which there are a few of us, but most of us are not great at having clarity and confidence in talking to not only talking to a robot, but even just talking to each other, talking about what our core values are, talking about what's important to us, how we're going to measure success. Like many times we spend days in workshops trying to figure this out for companies, for teams, for ourselves. And so we now have a technology that can do what we ask it, but it requires us to actually know how to have that conversation. And that's a very human skill. It's very much a soft skill. It requires emotional intelligence. It requires you to have self-awareness of what you actually want in order to clearly and confidently say it to a machine. And I'm maybe I shouldn't be surprised, but it often is a gap before we can even get started, is to help organizations understand how to just clarify their own desires and get it into a machine to help it amplify those results.
I want to talk about speed. Generative AI has 200 million monthly active users. It's advancing at a rate of 10x a year. And that means ChatGPT is going to be about 100 times smarter in 2 years. I think that's pretty mind-blowing for all of us. How do we think about the speed that this technology is advancing?
I think a lot of people in my world, the AI ethicists, are a little bit concerned about speed. And it's interesting because there was this moment where, I don't know if you remember, like last year, where a bunch of like very important people, Elon Musk and, people like him got together and were like, we're going to sign this petition and we're going to try and halt the progression of AI. And I remember that there weren't a bunch of ethicists involved in that conversation. Like it was actually more technologists. We then, of course, found out that Elon Musk was like building his own side hustle thing and wanted people to stop so he could go fast and whatever. But the reality is that ethicists never really said, we want you to stop. But there is a difference that happens to a process when you ask more questions, when you become more intentional, when you set a bit of mindful intention over the work that you're trying to do. And I think that is the direction or the change that we're starting to see. Is we don't necessarily want, what was it Mark Zuckerberg said? It was something like move fast and break things. Like we're not really in a world where move fast and break things serves people. We weren't back then either, really. But now when we move fast and break things with AI, breaking things means not giving credit to a demographic of people or putting the wrong people in jail. Like there is significant consequences to breaking things with AI. And so now we're like, move fast, but be intentional. Set intentional, guardrails around how you're going to, and you can move as fast as you want if you have seatbelts on, right? If you like, planes move extremely fast, but we don't do it without a special aircraft to protect us. So there's a lot of processes that need to go into building at speed. And anyone who's thinking about doing this, I actually think it's okay that we're moving fast, but that intentionality is critical. And I love like Timnit Gebru, Ruha Benjamin, Elizabeth Adams. These are all just some of the ethicists that have come out to say, like, you don't have to stop, just think, like be intentional about the technology you're building. And so everything that I do, I always tell people, like, you're not going to take a responsible AI class. You're not going to, follow a checklist and stamp it at the end. Like this is a philosophy that needs to be embedded in every stage of any project you do that involves AI. And let's face it, every project will probably have AI somewhere in it. And from now on, right? So how do you just make sure that you do that safely and responsibly? And just thinking about it changes the outcome, as opposed to just blindly being like, I have a Google alert that says AI gone wrong. It's similar to probably your show that you have, but AI gone wrong. And every day there's examples of reputable companies making bad choices in production AI. And I think that is a function of clarity over velocity, right? Like they'd rather be fast than be right. And that I think is dangerous.
Yeah, I'm really glad you went here. This is absolutely something we wanted to talk with you about. Ethical AI, responsible development of AI. We loved this quote last year. Democratic representative from California, Anna Eshoo, said that regulating AI is like getting socks on an octopus. And that resonated deeply. And you mentioned the petition that was signed. Obviously, there have been subsequent meetings in Washington. Europe seems to be leading the way with regulation. A lot of experts, CEOs, and leaders have shared their concerns. And then most recently, I saw that just this past week that the FTC is now investigating a lot of big companies for their partnerships with a variety of AI companies. So, we all understand AI is this profound technology. It's changing work, purpose, and life on this planet. And it's really amazing. We need to fasten our seatbelts, as you said. We need to slow down. Are there besides asking the right questions and slowing down, are there other things that come to mind from your vantage point, from your expert vantage point on how we put people and humanity first?
Yeah, I think the good news is that this isn't new. So there's a lot of existing research out there. But in lieu of asking you to go pull up papers and read, which nobody really does these days, there's an app for that, though. So you could feed that into GPT and have it summarized. But there are great papers on this. However, what we're starting to see is like the city of Phoenix, the city of Bellevue, like all these cities, and then states, and now even our own federal government, the Biden-Harris administration released an executive order. We've got lots of really good guidelines. Even the State Department released a AI architecture blueprint to understand what they're doing. And what I always try to do is look at people who have way harder constraints than I do, like regulated industry, federal government, like they're going to do things around security, governance that maybe I don't choose to do, but knowing what they've done creates a great starting point for me to think about this. So you don't have to, as an organization or even as an individual going into the space, you don't have to write this from scratch. You don't have to think in your mind, how do I create a governed, AI system? How do I create a system that serves everyone? The government is a great example of people who intend to serve everyone. And no matter where you sit on the political boundaries, like the system itself, and this is not just in the US, like in EU, in Canada, the system itself requires us to think differently because all demographics are impacted and all of these different lenses are required. And I think looking at like the executive order, I recently just printed the executive order. It was very long. And I also printed out the EU. I know, printed, right? People are going to be like, it was like AI and in the cloud. But I love it. I could pull up in my office drawer and show you. I have all these Post-it tabs. I love like Post-its and highlighting. But the EU put out the AI Act last year, and it's just incredibly valuable information, right? Like because you don't have to do all of it, but it's a great understanding of all this work that hundreds of people contributed to make that document possible that you can now use as a foundation. I often use it with consulting companies, especially in finance and healthcare, that have very similar kind of high compliance requirements. But if you're not in one of those regulated industries, building to that compliance makes you like that much better than your peers. So those are the types of things I do. I look around and say, who is doing this in a higher regulated world than I am? And what are they doing? And AI regulation isn't necessarily there yet, but there's plenty of regulation that boxes in how AI can be used to get outcomes. And so when you start to look at some of these documents, you'll realize there's actually a lot of SEC and FTC and all these different types of organizations that have compliance around how do you render services in the market. And AI has to play in those boxes because even if you're using AI, it doesn't get you out of, it's not a get out of jail free card for doing, anything you want. Like you still have to operate in our societal boundaries. And so seeing how organizations have done that is super helpful. So just those are like my secret sauce, right? Of how I come up with some of the patterns and blueprints. Like I use existing structures that had hundreds of people working on it, as a foundation for what I might do in retail or in consumer product goods or in even the transportation industry.
I want to do one follow-up on this. You said something earlier. So Alex just referenced speed. And then you said something earlier about this kind of hustle culture is going to bump up against AI in a very interesting way. And here's my thought is Alex and I often say, you can't out hustle AI. It just doesn't work. AI is this unbelievable, innovative technology that learns at scale. You know, in the ChatGPT example, nearly 200 million users are on this thing, and it's getting smarter by the second, by the millisecond. So you can't out hustle this thing. But now that we've said that, here's this thoughtful question for leaders and professionals is, how do you start to think differently about keeping up with this? We've talked about using it with your strengths, but it's moving so fast. And we've been in this hustle culture mindset that has told us in the United States for decades that work nights and weekends, strap technology all over you, be available all the time. Like, it's kind of ridiculous, but now we're in this changing moment where maybe we don't have to do those things anymore. So how do we keep up with AI?
I think one of the things that I personally do is try to make sure, and I am on the bleeding edge, pioneer. I always say, like, pioneers are the ones like face down in the dirt with arrows in their back. Right? So I'm in the dirt all the time where I'm like, well, that wasn't a great investment. So I think there's this opportunity, right? When we're working with this technology, you do have to pick your lane, so to speak, right? It's very difficult and almost mean to your brain to say you have to be a jack of all AI types of technologies. I have very good friends that are very focused on computer vision and what AI is doing in the world of machines that can see things, looking at documents even, like OCR and, object detection. Super fascinating. Not my world. I built a computer vision model, super fun, but that's not my expertise. There's other people that really like natural language. Like, I definitely lean into because of Alexa, I lean into the natural language side. How do we use conversation to connect to technology? But there's so many other areas that AI is used. One area is just forms recognition alone, document intelligence. I walk into dentist offices and they have these like stacks of paper and folders lined up. Like, we're moving in the direction of digitization, but many organizations, many industries aren't there yet. So as a professional start to navigate what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, like, what is your experience right now? Like, my experience very much, because of the last 10 years, it was all about building voice applications. It was natural for me to kind of move in the direction of, like, how do I talk more about evolving conversational AI type of application? So I work a lot in contact center, for example, because that's a lot of talking. And I feel like this AI is really good there. However, you could be anywhere. Like, I was just talking to a bunch of a farming conglomerate, of farmers that live in the middle of the United States that own all of the dairy farms, all over the country. They're thinking very differently about how this technology is going to be used. So I'm not asking them to keep up with all the language models. I'm actually asking them to get very clear on what can this technology do for you. Be use case driven and then understand those use cases. And it's what the best consulting firms do as well. Accenture, PwC, right? Like, their job is to have people who not know the tech. We actually presume people can learn the tech. We need you to know the problem and the business outcome that you can drive. What needle can you move? More importantly, what needle should you move when you're trying to use technology as an outcome? And those are much harder questions to solve for. But I also think it leads us back to that, like, AI is not going to take your job because AI doesn't understand the nuances of these deep domain expert questions. But someone who uses AI to answer that same question is going to do it better every single time than you, who's like, wait, let me go and look up the, or worse, that you're limited only to the things that you learned in the last 20 years, when an AI system has the benefit of millions of people who have learned those skills. So that's hundreds of millions, billions of man hours that it gets to access. Like, it's just not a fair fight. And so don't make that the competition, right? Like, you want to instead think about, what domain problems am I uniquely qualified to help a model understand and be amplified to solve? Because that's where I think all of the success I've seen, both professionally and as an industry, is when we lean into a problem we know we can solve and amplify that solution with AI, because now I can generate more revenue for a company. I can create more leads. I can close those leads. I can cross-sell and upsell more effectively. All those things create more prosperity for a company. And when you put me and AI to solve those problems versus someone who is just trying to do it the old fashioned way, and I say that kind of in jest, like the way they did it last year, it will pale in comparison. I always say, like, either you're a Netflix or a Blockbuster. And that's like Blockbuster. Like, you are going to be on a similar path of Blockbuster, Kodak, like these amazing brands who just didn't get it in the right time.
I want to stick with this notion of speed, and I want to invite you, Noelle, to put your futurist hat on for just a second. So AI is moving faster than we can possibly imagine, and quantum computing is not far behind, right? So to define this for our listeners, quantum computing is a multidisciplinary field comprising aspects of computer science, physics, mathematics, leveraging quantum mechanics to solve complex problems. And if you don't understand that, all you need to know is that Microsoft, IBM, and Google have all said that quantum computing is closer to passing critical calculation, reliability, and practicality milestones. So I'm sure you definitely understood that sentence if you didn't understand the one before. So how soon should we expect AI and quantum to collaborate? What does that future look like? Give us your crystal ball here.
Yeah, I mean, here's the good news is that we're collaborating already. So I've been on many panels where I am sitting right next to different partners that are building quantum solutions. To your point, they're not passing those yet, but the trajectory is very strong. Like, they're not passing. The same thing happened 10 years ago and maybe even 15 years ago in AI when we were just hitting human parity goals. It didn't mean that the tech was broken. It just meant we hadn't hit that goal yet. And then we hit it. And obviously, look what happened. And you are much better off if you were involved in the technology before, right? Because you have this whole landing zone of, what is this? How do I use it? What's it useful for? Now, quantum is not like ChatGPT in the sense that it's going to be accessible and interesting to everyone. There are only certain types of problems that quantum is good at. And the reason why quantum and AI work so well together is that it's AI problems that it's really good at. And usually it's things that are very highly complex algorithms, multiple algorithms that work together that are often going to be accelerated. So if you look at all the work that's been done in research around, just cancer research, protein and amino acid research, like diabetes research, this type of stuff to run simulations on what happens when you change molecules it's not infinite, but it's an incredibly large amount of tests that you have to do. And you have to run simulations for long periods of time. But that period of time is dictated by the hardware that we have to run this kind of test. So not every problem is going to need a quantum computer to run, but problems that are extremely important to humanity. How do people live longer? How do we avoid disease? How do we prevent disease? How do we change disease in a human body once it's developed? Like, those big, huge, very difficult problems to solve right now are projected to take 100 years, 150 years to solve. We can now, depending on how this accelerates, right, we can solve those problems in fractions of that time. So it's an extremely important time, but for those of you already being like, oh my gosh, I have to learn AI and now I have to learn quantum. Quantum is awesome and cool because of the use cases it will solve. And for those of us who care about humanity, and I presume if you're listening, you probably do. For those of us who care, you might find it motivating not to use that technology to solve a problem you have, but just to know that this technology is being used. It's one thing that motivates me every day. I solve a lot of like rudimentary business application problems with AI. My clients are like, fix my back office, reduce my email, reduce my total time of conversation in a call center. Like, these are not life-changing things that I'm working on. They're maybe life-changing to someone, but when I on the weekend, I'm like looking at projects that are being worked on, amino acid and protein folding projects that are being worked on in quantum at IBM. I'm like, okay, that's pretty cool. I want to be part of this evolution. And I feel like all of this technology is moving in that direction. So it helps energize me to keep learning more. So yeah, I always encourage people. And just so you know, IBM does have a developer playground. You can go and play around with quantum. There's a bunch of tutorials you can do. But like I said, I don't want you to get too intimidated by it. It's fun to go play around and see what's possible, but it's for the hardest problems that we have. And most of us listening are going to be helping companies, helping ourselves with much less difficult problems that won't require quantum computing to solve. So I say, like, use it as an exciting moment to learn about something cool that will change the world. And if I'm always like, if I can change the world, I want to be part of it. And if nothing else, you can just be an advocate for the work that's happening there. But some of you will be inspired to go get your PhD and join the workforce in that way.
AI literacy is a core focus for you. How do you define AI literacy? For example, you just said, hey, you got to pick a lane. There's so many AIs out there. Which lane are you going to get into? And then, generative AI is kind of the hottest AI topic right now. But how do you help people improve their AI literacy?
I think it's such an important question because so many people, and you even say literacy and people are like, oh, that sounds like more complicated than it is. But really it's exposure. And as a matter of fact, the first thing I did, it was early last year. I created a generative AI user group, and I didn't create it because I'm like a person that creates user groups. Like, I just knew I wanted to get people together. And I will tell you, the best thing happened. So if you have a little tiny inspiration in you as a listener and you're like, oh my gosh, I should start a user group, you should totally do it. But people who showed up, we had 10-year-olds that were using Roblox and AI in Roblox. We had, middle of career, we had early career, we had students, we had people who were over the age of 65. Like, it was beautiful. You can go to our we'll maybe give you the link so you can go check out. But we have this picture of us now on our meetup homepage. Every time I look at it, I'm like, that's what literacy means. It means everybody gets to see it, and we see it from different angles. So user groups are beautiful because we had that 10-year-old. We were just like, hey, if you want to present, you can. He's like, well, I'll show you what I built in Roblox. And I'm like, perfect. And he got up in front of everybody and like shared what he did. It was so good. Like, I could cry. It was so good. But that's what literacy means to me. Like, it's not you're going to become literate in the sense like you're going to read a book or you're going to take a class, but like, how do you develop a sense of comfort with this technology? Comfort that gives you, and this is important, the psychological safety to ask more questions. And that's why these user groups or these connections, even if it's online, like I'm doing a I Heart AI challenge right this month, because I want people to just feel like, hey, I can come here and I can be new. I can just be getting started. I can ask questions and people will, it's a safe, fun environment. Everyone's happy. Everyone's happy to help. And those environments, I don't experience at work sometimes, right? Like, I don't go to the office and feel like, oh my gosh, I could just like be free to, ask any question I want. I often am like, oh my gosh, that person just told me, you obviously know this, but and I'm like, wait, but I don't know that, right? Like, so it's less safe for me to be curious and play. And literacy is all about like, how do I understand this technology enough to ask questions of it, to ask questions about it, to know what is dangerous. But to come, to come into this world, especially now with generative AI, and not understand the opportunity that it presents, I just feel like that's one of my missions, right? Is how do I just light up someone's world by just saying, hey, I call it lamp lighting, right? Like, how do I just light a lamp so you could just see what's in there? And now it's up to you. But showing versus telling, playing around, and creating a psychologically safe space is a big part of what I consider creating a literate world around this technology.
I love that. I love your lamp lighting. And I love it because it's so important right now. There's a lot of fear around AI, and we have to be thoughtful to acknowledge that. We also have to be reasonable. There are going to be some downsides to this technology, and there are going to be some bad actors who use this technology in unfortunate ways. But I want to bring up something that a lot of people don't want to talk about, and I'll just do it very succinctly. Sometimes we're in AI conversations. Alex and I are definitely in a lot of them. And sometimes big fears come out and it can take the conversation into a downward spiral where it kind of goes into a dark place and people get hung up. What do you think we can do, we, the royal we, can do when conversations kind of head into that negative place? And then are there some risks there with the echo chamber?
Yeah, I think it's one of my biggest concerns, right? And I'm, of course, hypersensitive to it in the conversations that I have. But when I am watching a space, I will tell you, actually, one of my first viral TikTok videos, I talked about bias in AI. And it was the first time I was exposed to, like, I did this very quick. It was like 30 seconds, maybe less than 30 seconds. It was just talking about how a model saw, instead of seeing, I gave it a, picture of an African American. Instead of African American, it saw something else. And I was like, this is a problem. And the amount of people that chimed in, and the fact that none of them knew AI at all, like, it was very apparent to me, but it perpetuated all of this. It started off like, we should do, you know me, right? You should do more. We should think more about this. This is a great opportunity for responsibility. Like, it was a very optimistic approach. And then, but the comments, like you said, they spiraled into this, like, AI is going to kill us all, basically.
Yes.
And I realized that, and then nobody really combated it, right? Like, and we know that that's not the truth. However, sometimes either we don't spend the time, or B, I just wonder, sometimes I'm in a world where people presume everyone knows everything. And sometimes it's easy to believe that because you're in a room where everyone's like, yeah, I know that. Yeah, I know that. Even if they don't know it, they just say they know it because you're in this like echo chamber where everyone's kind of agreeing with each other. But the danger with that is that it creates this barrier. So for those people who are scared, afraid, or who ask a question that maybe seems, I don't know, not as complex or not as educated as everyone else in that room, they're dismissed, or worse, they're just ignored. And then they don't feel safe to ask those questions again. And so I just saw in that TikTok, like, list of comments, and I didn't delete it. I wanted it to be a reminder of, like, this is where humanity can go if you don't, like, have the harmony, the balance that is required. So I want to still have that discussion. I want you to say, well, doesn't that mean? But then I want I want to break down that echo chamber and introduce academics and introduce industry professionals that can say, hey, by the way, yeah, I know that looks like that's true here, but here's how we had that experience and here's how we fixed it. That's the piece that's often missing, I think, is that people don't come in and say, oh, by the way, we solve for that. I am usually unique when I go to a company and tell them that models that lie, hallucinations, that's actually something we can avoid, and that there's pretty significant work in that space. It's the first time they've heard anyone say that. But you go on the media and all it says is AI lies. That's it. There is no, but we've also created a blueprint for architecting solutions that don't lie. That part's missing. And so I think, like with everything, trust what you hear, but verify that you're not just talking to a group of people that maybe don't have your best holistic interests at heart.
I love everything you just said. And I do want to go a little bit further in a moment into algorithmic bias and how do we think about that. But I want to make a pit stop first. And I want to talk about this notion that we've been exploring here. We call it AI anxiety. We actually created a slide where the A and the I are capitalized and the rest of the words, the rest of the letters anxiety are lowercase. So AI anxiety, right? And one of the things that I've always heard is move a muscle, change a thought, right? And I had a mentor, Jeff Hoffman, who is one of the co-founders of Priceline.
I know Jeff. I'm sorry.
You know Jeff?
Yes. Awesome.
You and Jeff, I could totally see you and Jeff having a ball together because he's got such great energy and he's so endlessly positive and he helps a lot of entrepreneurs. So one of Jeff's core kind of messages is get up off the couch. Like, nothing's going to happen when you're sitting on the couch. Get off the couch. And, so much of your journey and your success has been rooted in this notion of learning by doing. right? And that by doing these things, that's how we get out of this anxious state, taking an action, leading experiments, trying new things. Now, we actually just invited an audience over the weekend to do just that. We gave a keynote for the International Interior Design Association on basically what is human excellence in the digital era. And there was a lot of fear about AI. We kind of walked them through these personal growth stories, professional growth stories, the convergence of personal and professional growth, and ultimately ended with a workshop inviting them into a generative AI 30-day challenge, right? And you're doing AI challenges all the time with your audience and community. We would love to hear, why is this approach so core to what you do? And what do you notice about what it creates and how it changes the energy in the groups that you work with?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's different about the way we do it now is like last, I don't know, a year ago, maybe 5 years ago, we would have like wrote an ebook or something, or we would have, maybe wrote a book, like an actual physical book, and given it to people and been like, read this. But for all, good or bad, we have much less attention spans now. And so I also find that, especially after
what
COVID,
did you just say? Sorry, my attention span is just
exactly, goldfish, right? Like 7 seconds or something. But it's so we have this, problem there, and then we also have what COVID did to us, which is like we want to get together and we want to connect. Like there were times where a lot of us were like, "Wait a second, I haven't actually talked to anyone or met with anyone," and so these challenges I find, and you can call them anything you want, like you could webinars or whatever, but bringing people together and getting them to communicate together. I love challenges because I'm ambitious and I like leaderboards and it's fun. It's actually better. My challenges doesn't let me be on a leaderboard, which is a very big, like human exercise for me to be somewhere where I can't actually be like number one, but creating these like engagement leaderboards and how we are rewarding people is not because they read a class. It's based on their interaction with each other. So the more interaction they have with their fellow classmates or challenge mates, the more, accelerated their levels. And people go nuts for this. I mean, they love it. But what it also does is it creates a sense of fun. It also is low investment on their part, but huge value on the back end. So in my case, there's lots of content that's like what I do in my challenges. Like you can go to Microsoft Learn and do a text-based, 5-module learn generative AI, but it's text-based, like, I don't know. And it's even really cool because in the text-based one, you click a button and it takes you into an environment where you can build something. I have found, and I'm sure you probably found the same thing, like most people, when they're given a book or go into a class like that, like their ability to complete the thing, like to actually finish the book or finish the lab exercise, like it's dismal numbers, like less than 10% of people who start things finish them. But when you tie it into a community, right, you get all of these psychological benefits of accountability because people see you there, of connection, of like, there's all these like psychological and dopamine driving behaviors that allow you to not just learn what you want to learn, but learn it in a way that increases your retention, creates better relationships, and makes you more successful at articulating what you've learned when you're done. And I found like it's a magical blend. And that's why I always encourage people, like, if you have an opportunity, you don't have to take a challenge per se, but it's the same thing with user groups, right? Showing up, being present, and then putting your fingers on a keyboard and testing out whatever it is you're trying to learn. It's not enough to read anymore. I think as a society, like we need to be much more active in our approach to learning. And let's face it, the tech we're talking about, you learn by using it. It learns by you using it. And so it's critical to that path. Yeah.
Speaking of people and culture, action learning, immersive learning, one of the things that you do when you start an AI project to help the culture is that you begin with values. Now, most people would not even pair these two things together. Why are we talking about human values when we're supposed to be here talking about this cool new tech? But we're not talking about the values on the wall. Like, you know how some companies are like, oh, the values are on the website, but nobody knows them. No, you're talking about the actual values of the people sitting in the room, which we're excited to hear more about this approach and why it's so important to your work.
Yeah, one of the things I love to do, I do lots of keynotes. So if you ever like watch me on LinkedIn or on social, you'll see all these keynotes that I do. But that's like the tip of the iceberg, right? The tip of the spear, if you will. It's the very first thing I do with people. And then almost always afterwards, I'm surrounded by people who are like, oh my gosh, what about this and this and this? And they have all these questions. And so I will go to those organizations and I will sit with their executive teams. And I always say, the more diverse that team is, the better, right? I don't want just the technology executives, right? I want legal and finance and procurement and, security, development, engineering, all of them. And normally they've never been in a room together, or at least they don't do it very often. And I'm now going to try and, build on what I talked to them about in a keynote, inclusive engineering, the power of AI. And the first thing I will say is like, when you're building a new project, what's the first thing that you need to do? And I will ask them this question. And it's surprising to me. Well, it's maybe not surprising, but the first thing, it depends on who's in the room. If there's people on the tech side, they'll often be like, oh, well, you need to know what data you have, right? Like that's the critical thing. What data do you have will decide what solutions you build. And then the business people, right? The CMO, the CHRO, like they'll be like, I actually don't care about the data. I want to know what problem we're going to solve with this. Like, what exactly do I get for the effort that we're going to put in? What is the business value? And that immediately explained a huge gap that we had in our entire industry, is that tech would build stuff and lob it over to business, and business would be like, it's cool, but it doesn't actually solve the thing that hurts me right now. So thank you. Mm-hmm. But I'm not sure what to do with this. And it creates this kind of lackluster relationship. So what we ended up doing was flipping that and bringing these people together, asking them this question, and then asking them as a whole and it's literally a whiteboard session, right? Where I write on a whiteboard and I say, tell me what your core values are as an organization. And I let all of them. And it's funny because there's this awkward silence because they're like, what if I say something that's not actually one of our core values? Yeah. And I'm like, safe space. Yes. Yell it out. And once we get them going, they start pulling out things like, CMOs, like I care a lot about integrity in our customer communication channels. And then the software engineering team is going to say, well, we care a lot about making sure our code is reliable and secure. And all of these things, like we write them all down. And it's interesting what ends up happening is these executives look at all of these things across all of their organization and they start to see themes. But most importantly, what they thought was important to them, they start to realize. And actually, I had one woman say, she's like, okay, so I really want my thing that we're going to do, but I actually realized that's better for the business. And she has no direct benefit from it because of its alignment to the core values of a company. But I do always find that it's interesting because many organizations struggle with even understanding. And remember, we were talking about soft skills, like using this technology to help them just create clarity around what they want to do. What do you want to achieve as a company? And most companies haven't thought about that holistically across their business. And so, yeah, you're right. It's very foreign. People are like, where are we going here? Like, is this an intervention? Like, what's happening? And I'm like, no, you'll see. Because the use cases we derive will be directly correlated to your core values, and it will make you committed to doing the right things to get those results. And it's critical to the successful projects I've seen go to production.
That's fantastic. I love this notion of values. Every time you approach anything in your world, you do it in such a human-centered way. And we just absolutely love that. And I want to talk about the shift. I want to shift away from values and I want to talk about voices. So we need a diverse representation and an accurate representation of values. We also need inclusive teams to do this right. So it's not just, are we having the right conversation? It's, are we having the right conversation with the right group of people? How do we create more inclusive teams? And a follow-up on that, and I want you to keep me honest on this, is I believe the statistic is that only 1% of the women in tech are Latina. Is that correct?
Yes, less than 1%, actually, sadly.
Less than 1%. So as we think about this conversation of rolling out AI, doing these projects the right way, getting inclusive teams, the second part of that is, how do we get more Latin women in tech?
Oh my gosh, 100%. Well, the team over at Latinas in Tech and Latin, I just got an article published by Latin Style. They'll be happy to hear you say this because I 100% look around and go, wow, there's not a lot of me around here. And there are a lot of like Latinos, Black, a lot of diversity ethnically in organizations. It's just where they are in the organization. And I will share very transparently, maybe vulnerably, that when I look at organizations that have numbers that identify how diverse they're trying to be, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's awesome. You want to achieve 50% gender parity. That's fantastic. But then I dig a little deeper, and I never knew to do this before because it didn't occur to me that it would be different. But I then would say, okay, well, is that same number true for your executives? And the reality would be, oh no, it only applies to the roles beneath the executive team. And that's almost worse to me. Like, I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. So now you're going to have a inclusive team managing a bunch of inclusive people. Like, ew. Anyway, so now I think very like, come on, like, let's think about this. And I don't think I know it's not intentional, right? I know it. I'm positive because the people are so proud of their results. But if it doesn't go all the way to the top, it's almost like you didn't do it at all. Like you have to go all in on this. So that being said, so I appreciate you mentioning it because I, of course, am a big passionate fan of exposing. And that's why literacy is so important because most people even in Miami, I created I have now 4, but my first generative AI user group was in Miami for exactly that reason, because people in Miami didn't even know it was an option to build a career in this space because they're told in high school that they'll be vocational. Like it's just a systemic bias that seeps into the educational system that says, you probably won't even go to college. Like that's the default mentality, especially in anywhere that's rural in the United States. People are told you might not go to college. And maybe they don't, but that doesn't mean you're now going to work at McDonald's. Not that that's bad, but it doesn't define your path. Like you get to choose. And in this world, especially, we're starting to see the benefit, going back to the, first part of that question, the benefit of that level of diversity in teams. When I build teams, and I built a team at Amazon, and I built multiple teams at Amazon and then another set of teams at Microsoft. And during that time, I would look for people, not just that were gender diverse and ethnically diverse. Of course, do that. If you can see it, you should do it. But then I would look much deeper. I used to call it a symphony of talent. Like I want a little bit of everyone. I'm not looking to have an all women team or an all woman panel, though I've been asked to do those, but I actually shy away from those because I want diversity of thought. And that's not going to mean like, I don't want any white male team members. Like sometimes we over index on diversity and it ends up building not diverse teams at all. We end up being homogenous, in just a new way. And so I think it's really important when you're building these types of teams to think, how do I get a symphony of talent? How do we get a little bit of everyone? And everyone, I mean like people who own cats and dogs because they think differently. And I'm a cat owner, so I should don't hate me or at me about that. But I love cats. And I'm actually a dog owner in cat owner experience. But that being said, I also want people who came from traditional educational experiences like Harvard and Ivy League and community and colleges. But I also want community colleges. I want people who never went to school and did everything via book learning. Everyone's life experience brings this richness. Now that leads us to something that I think you all know, you probably have said. It's a bit of a cliche now, but how do we, when you have this diversity in your team, actually let them bring their authentic selves to work, actually hear what they have to say? Because many times we'll build this beautifully inclusive team and then we actually don't let them have a voice to do anything different. And that's a challenge. So creating an inclusive team. The last thing I'll say about that is empathy. Let's just face it. It's hard to build an inclusive team. There's lots of reasons why there's not enough women in the space. Those that are here, may not stay very long if they're not treated well. And the reality is that they're not being treated very well. So, so it's not like the pipeline has been good. It's keeping people of diverse backgrounds in tech that is actually our challenge. But that being said, you also, if you can't sit there and say, I need more women, at least I'll tell you, one thing I often do is I will ask people that I'm interviewing or that I'm interviewing with, I will ask them, or I'll just look them up on LinkedIn and find out, like, do you have a family? Do you have daughters? Just having daughters makes you more empathetic to females in the workplace. But also, like, do you have a child with special needs? I do. That makes you just generally empathetic overall. Like, not that I'm asking this as a modifier in a hiring conversation, but just knowing that about someone, being willing to let them be vulnerable enough to share who they are and what they bring to the office becomes extremely valuable when building AI models. And companies that know this are succeeding. Companies that don't will take much longer to get there. And you can ask Microsoft and Amazon, how long it took them to get to market because of that homogeneity.
You can have a palette of color. You can have a palette of gender. But if everybody went to the same school or has the same degree, even though their life experience will have been shaped by gender, by race, you're still getting closer to that group think. And having the broader diversity of socioeconomic standing, of various degrees, of places in the world and the cultures that you grew up in, that adds a whole nother flavor of richness. But you have to create a container that encourages people to feel safe, to have conversations that are radically different, to agree to disagree, or you haven't achieved any of those objectives. You just have a really interesting group of people that are all being encouraged to think and talk and behave in the same way. And you've screwed it all up.
Yeah, as if you
screwed it all
maybe
up.
As if you did it already, or as if you didn't do it at all. One quote from an article recently from one of my friends at IBM. She was talking about responsible AI, but she said, the wider your variance, the more standard your mean. And it's a mathematical equation for diversity and why it's so important and inclusive thinking. And I loved it because it speaks kind of to those academics, but and it's a scientifically, mathematically proven, like it's proven that the wider your variance is in building something, the more standard and more ability you'll have to serve. And that's why I always say, build AI that serves everyone. And you can achieve that, but it's a function of how diverse your team is. And so for those mathematicians out there, I thought you might appreciate that quote.
That's an awesome quote. The human side of diversity is a powerful angle, and we must look at that. And you did an excellent job of painting that picture and taking us into that world and why that's such an important path for us as we go forward. Let's take a look at a really crisp example of how this manifests in artificial intelligence. So when you only have a certain type of person with a certain background developing a model, you start to end up with bias. So last summer, I attended NeoCon, which is a conference in Chicago, where I saw Amy Webb give an excellent presentation called Designing Our Path Forward. I loved it. And near the end of the presentation, she said, I want to show you what bias looks like in generative AI. And we were all chomping at the bit. Can't wait to see what she's going to do. She takes ChatGPT in Mid-Journey and she goes, I created some images. And I said to it, tell me what a CEO looks like for a large organization, all white males. Show me a medium organization, all white males. Show me a startup company. There was, out of all of those, there was one pseudo-diverse person that came out and all male. And we're all just looking at this like, oh my gosh. But then she goes, get this. I'm going to ask it what a CEO looks like for a tampon company. And it drops white male. Right? And my jaw's on the floor. Everybody in the room, jaws are on the floor. And we were like, oh my gosh. And so she says to us, this is algorithmic bias. This is what happens when you don't have the right influences, diversity of thought, diversity of background diversity of nationality and culture and socioeconomic status and race. And so I just think it's such an important example when you see it like that in a room, and everybody in the room instantly has the epiphany of, oh, this isn't good. Right. So you do a lot of work around this conversation, and we'd love to get your thoughts on, okay, how do we recognize this and improve going forward?
Yes. And generative is a bit unfortunate because it represents all the it is a collection of data on the internet, hundreds of thousands of websites, trillion words that were extracted from the internet. And so it doesn't necessarily reflect, which is worse actually, but it doesn't reflect the development team as much as it reflects the humanity or the, at least the internet at the time. And I always ask people, like, if you look back and think about who made the internet, and some funny people will name a single politician about who created the internet, but no matter where your mind goes as to who made the internet, the reality is that not everyone had a chance to put content on a website. It was a certain group of people. Like, not every country on the planet submitted content. No, not everybody had web servers and app servers and things that they could use to contribute to a generative model. So as a result, it ends up being this slant that we see. I wouldn't call it a failure, but the challenge we have is to have people, before you launch something like that into production for a specific use case, is to have people who would know to ask the question, what happens when I, as a Black woman, ask a model a question like, can I be a CEO, or what does a CEO look like? Or, I mean, I've asked questions like, what does an IBM consultant look like? You can imagine what it does. And then I asked all sorts of, like, what about a consultant at this company? They all looked the same. I'm like, so consultants look like this. And they all wore the same kind of suit. Anyways, it's fascinating. But the reality is that, like, it's okay that the model thinks that. I always tell people, models, machine learning models, algorithms are not broken. They're just untrained, right? So it means that no one has taken the opportunity to say, that's not the right answer, and teach it the right answer. So a great book, actually, I talked to you guys about it when I first met you, by Safiya Noble, Dr. Safiya Noble. It's called Algorithms of Oppression. It's a great book, but it talks about a different age. It talks about when Google owned the algorithm. So as a result of her work, Google and Meta both went into their algorithms and made changes to impact the way search worked. The challenge we have now is that these models are being built at scale across lots of different surfaces, and nobody is, like, and I used to never say this. I used to never say, oh my gosh, thanks to the leadership at Meta. Like, those were not words I would say. But now I realize, in a world where that is disintegrated, autonomized across all these different companies, it's better to have at least a person who can come down and say, we need to fix that. And we all fix it. And that's where, to kind of dovetail back to something we said, earlier in our conversation, that's where regulation is really going to have to come in. Like, how do we enforce something that so many companies are doing? And without that type of regulation, what's worse is that funded bad actors, even if there's a good practice, even if the biggest companies in the world are doing it, these can be open models that bad actors use, and they don't have to follow any rules. And if there's no, FTC or SEC to shut them down, I'm not sure, that's a pretty dangerous spot. But bias in general can be mitigated, but it does require someone in the room to be like me. I'm always like, so have we thought about what that looks like for a child with Down syndrome or an adult with Down syndrome? Because I have a child with Down syndrome. Like, have we thought about what that looks like to, someone who can't speak clearly or has a traumatic brain injury? Because my dad has had a traumatic brain injury. Like, my lens of, is this going to work for everyone, is different because of my lived experience. But I have to admit, every team I'm on, it totally depends on the individual leader of that team, whether they even ask me my opinion. Like, they brought me to the company, they put me on the team, but they might not even ask. And that's why I say empathy is huge, because you need leaders who are willing to ask the question and then take it seriously when they get an answer. And I don't think we've got a culture, a culture, I always say AI ready culture. Like our AI ready culture at the leadership level, I don't think is ready to even know that it's their job to ask the question, to extract the diverse answers. Like I don't even know that we do that as a industry. And so that's something that we're working on fixing. You know, I work, of course, on fixing that every day.
You have a powerful quote on this. Bias begets empathy. By acknowledging our biases, we move toward empathy. Did you come up with that? Is that original Noelle Russell stamp?
I mean, I hope so. Like nothing, I guess, is original. Like maybe my great grandmother said it. But it definitely, I actually think I coined it like in our conversation.
I love, we were like, yes, it was,
I do that all the time. I'll say things. I'm like, wow, like Noelle brain, that was a pretty good thing you said, but it comes from direct experience, right? Like 100% that happens. Like as soon as you know what it is, you now know what to look for. And now you can create better processes to protect yourself against those type of things. Awareness. And I always say self-awareness is so important, but in specifically algorithmic bias is literally human bias personified and magnified in an AI model. And so, like I always tell people, especially on my TikToks, when people get crazy and they're like, oh my gosh, AI is so biased. I'm like, well, I mean, technically that is humanity. Like the humans that built it, the human data that trained it, like that model didn't come up with that. Like we trained it on that. So I always say, if we want to build better AI, we kind of have to build better humans. So that's good news. We can all like step up and become
That's
better
another
humans.
mic drop moment. I mean, wow.
yeah. Let's go. We got a lot
Let's
of
go.
I absolutely love this. I also, it's a perfect segue into, we wanted to ask you about your brand, and it's not just mic drop moments. It's you wearing I Heart AI t-shirts. Your digital community bears that name. And you even have your own Noelle Funko Pop wearing that t-shirt. So tell us about the origin and the spirit of this fantastically inclusive, optimistic, and elevation-oriented brand.
I love it. So no one's ever asked me the origin story. So this is awesome. I'll get to say it for the first time. But I was working for Microsoft and I was doing a lot of executive briefings. So I was talking to like the Fortune 100. And back then it was about applied AI. Generative hadn't been built yet or launched. And so I was talking to them about how to use cognitive services, how to leverage web developers to access AI models that they didn't fully understand. Similar stuff I'm doing now, but this was, 9 years ago. And when I was doing that, I realized, I wanted to like show Noelle. I always say walking affirmation. I wanted to be a walking affirmation of what I talked about. And it was always about like AI is helpful. I've always been optimistic and rationally so, but optimistic. And so the team built me a shirt that said I Heart AI. They only made one of them and it was in a terrible like material, the like cheapest t-shirt you could buy.
Yes.
I still have it today, but you put it on, you're like, yeah, I don't want to wear this. But it like, I loved that shirt. I wore it. Every client, I wore it and every client would be like, oh my gosh, I love your t-shirt. It totally, it frames, like literally I walk into a room and it frames people. Like people already know how I'm going to talk about something and they'll ask me hard questions and I will still like, I understand enough about the technology to understand the edges, but most importantly, I'm optimistic about this because of what I've seen happen in the world in a positive way. And so that turned into hundreds, thousands of stages where I got on stage and every time I got in front of more than 2 people, I would wear this shirt. And so a couple of years ago, someone was like, hey, do you sell that shirt? And I was like, I don't, but I should. And I don't sell it. I got a merch site. So instead of selling it though, I was like, you know what? I don't know, maybe it's me. I think it's as a developer, but I love getting swag when I do things like go to conferences, get in challenges, take a test, whatever it is. I like swag. So I started launching these challenges. And as a result of being in the challenge, and only if you were in and only if you finished, would you get, instead of a certificate, you'd get an I Heart AI t-shirt. So there's like, I don't know, a couple hundred people with this t-shirt in the world. And And so now I realized February is coming up, right? And so I was like, oh my gosh, we have to build on this brand and call it like I Heart AI Month. and now we're going to do this challenge and everyone's going to get more t-shirts. But more importantly, it like sets people up. It frames people to go, this is going to be a positive experience without having to ever say that. Like people just feel good. People smile. They want to take selfies with me. Like it's super fun. But yeah, that's how it started. It started really with clients being like, oh my gosh, it's so refreshing to see someone coming from an optimistic, how can we improve, as opposed to, wow, this is going to hurt some people.
Alex,
and so not that
we
it
gotta
won't,
get
and
these
not
shirts.
that we don't have to be careful, but
Alex,
yeah.
I was thinking the
Oh my
exact
gosh.
same thing.
We're going to totally wear it.
I would also like an I Heart AI trucker hat. I just want to throw that in. I would wear that all day long. Yeah.
Swagalicious. I got you.
Noelle, we have one more question to ask you, and then we're going to take you into a speed round. And I'm very excited to ask you this question. You mentioned you are going to be pivoting away from your current role to build something new. So if it's okay, can you share a little bit about this big, exciting new journey?
Yes. And it's I mean, I don't even want to say it's bittersweet because it's less bitter because it's so good, but it was hard. It was a hard decision because I had such an amazing year last year at Accenture building a generative AI practice. I talked to so many clients. Clients actually built stuff that I advised them to build. It was an incredible amount of momentum. And then coming out of the year though, and every year I'm always like, I mentioned, I plan with my husband. We sit down, we kind of think about what we're going to do. And in our planning this year, we always think like, what is it by the end of next year? Do I want to be like, I did that. I built that. I created that. And so he has his own. And of course I fully support. And then I had this idea and it was really around the same idea, like this I Heart, AI, but I wanted to create a vehicle for people to learn, not just, high level learning, but really one of my biggest benefits of building a lot of this technology over the last decade, specifically in AI, is that I know what, day one is all about like the excitement and enthusiasm, the hype cycle, if you will. But so few people know what happens on day two. Like what happens after the POC is built? How do you get something into production? And so I have a company called the AI Leadership Institute, and I've done keynotes and workshops, but I wanted to bring a little bit more of that awareness. I always say the rising tide of AI, it raises the boats, all of the boats. And so far I've been really focused on yachts, like the biggest companies in the world. And I want to reshift my focus to raising the boats too, like the nonprofits, the small to medium sized businesses. And I don't mean like new businesses that are one person. I mean like 1 million in revenue, 2 million, 5 million, 10 million in revenue, like these businesses that are not on the list for the Accentures, Deloittes of the world, but they need this technology just as much. And I find actually that at scale, they can make the biggest impact, right? Because they're often connecting, they're not just doing these massive like Delta and Coca-Cola and these types of brands. They're doing all the work in the middle. And there's not a lot of people serving them, certainly not with my expertise and my network. And so we are that's why we created the community. That's what we're focused on. And we're going to start off by taking on, 10 or 15 of these clients to help them out. But hopefully we'll be able to scale the business considerably over the year. Because there's, like I said, it's just a gap I see in the market. And I'm just very passionate about helping them do and equalize. That's the other word I use. Like, I want to be an equalizer. I don't want it to just be the yachts. Like, why can't everybody like have a good experience and serve their customers at the highest level? It shouldn't just be reserved for those who have the biggest pocketbooks.
That is beautiful.
Or I guess wallets, whatever. Thank you.
We love that. That's really, really amazing and exciting, and something that is so purpose built for who you are and what you can do and the value you can add. And yeah, I love it. It's just a beautiful growth of your platform, your voice, and the gifts that you bring into this world.
Thank you very much. Yes, I am super excited about it. It's rare. I always call it the Ikigai, right? People
Yep.
have, so I went through that multiple years ago. But like, this is literally that thing, right? Where I happen to be good at a thing. I happen to love that thing. And oh my goodness, does the world need it right now? And so I'm jumping in both feet.
Also, something that Alex and I can deeply relate to is this burning desire to want to build something that is from your heart, and it's taking all of your gifts, and you're going to invest in this thing like you've never invested in anything before as a contribution back during one of the most disrupted times in human history. Like, this gift that you're going to give is going to be a great equalizer. So we want to be your biggest fans. We want to take this and sing it from the mountaintops. And trust me, we will do that as much and as often as possible. Now, I'm going to take you into a speed round. 60 seconds. You're going to go with your gut, go with whatever's on the tip of your tongue, and Alex is going to kick us off.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
All right. You completed Stanford's inaugural generative AI certificate program. What are a few great yet low cost or free Gen AI training programs our audience should consider?
Oh my gosh, this is great. So that's not like a speed round question, but I will do it fast. So I actually have a document called upskilling.ai where I list all my free courses that I recommend, but I'm going to give you the top 3 because most people don't, like, if I give you a list of 40, you're not going to do all 40 anyway. But one of them is Microsoft Learn. You can go to aka.ms/AI business school. Or you could just Google Microsoft AI Business School. It's industry agnostic and platform agnostic. So even though Microsoft put it together, they don't talk about Microsoft tech. It's just, how does AI apply? And it's not new, but it's extremely good, especially for someone just getting started. For those who are getting a little bit more further along, deeplearning.ai is one of my favorite platforms. I have a vision on my roadmap to teach a class for them one day. But deeplearning.ai, it goes from non-technical all the way to technical. So head over there. You can get a certificate through Coursera if you want to pay to play, but it's all free content. It probably won't stay free all the time, but it's definitely free now. So that's the second piece that I would go to. And then last, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention like learning by doing. So there is a couple projects that I want you to take a look at, and you can actually just go to GitHub and you can search for generative AI projects or Microsoft generative AI or Azure or AWS or any of those words. And you'll see these projects come up and they're tutorial based. And so in the upskilling.ai book or like free download thing, you can see links to those, but you could just as easily search for them. But that way you can actually build something. And I will tell you, when I started building solutions on GitHub, I did not know the language or how to code that language or anything. Like, I learned by just building it. And so don't be intimidated if you don't know all of the things or even any of the things. Like, just jump in and start playing around. And now you have people like us to help you. So I'm happy to connect on LinkedIn or wherever to answer questions that people might have.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
We all have kids. So I have 3 kids. You have 6 kids. Alex has a kid. And here's a question that comes up a lot. How do we get kids ready for this AI world and this AI conversation? And frankly, how can we keep them safe? So what is your 60-second take on how do we think about AI and kids?
Yeah, so I'm a tech mom, so I'm a little bit biased, and I have a lot of things in place. I monitor our network traffic. There's an app, if you are on any of the big technology internet providers, there's an app and you can choose what your kids see. I am intentional. I do not monitor screen time, just to give you a, like transparent. I don't say, oh my gosh, you can't be on a screen, but I do monitor what they can actually get out of our network. So I guess it's a bit of policing. But that being said, I encourage them to use technology. I encourage them to use Amazon Alexa. If they ask me a question, I encourage them to go ask. And I do that because I want them to get in a world 10 years from now when they're in the workforce, they're going to be talking to their technology. So the more of that I can facilitate, the better. Other things though, my rule of thumb as a technology driven household is produce before you consume. And it's a weird rule for some, but I require them that they don't have to produce it for the internet. Like, they don't have to build social media content, but they have to create something. Like, They have to write it down. They have to say an announcement. Like they have to do something before they're allowed to just scroll inherently on social media. And it's awesome because it shifts now. They are looking for things to talk about. So at night, every night at dinner, okay, I'm over. But after every night at dinner, we do gratitude. So we go around and say what we're thankful for. And they use that as an opportunity to share the things that they're learning. So they're producing content to be shared at the table. And now when they go and look for content to watch, like they're literally not looking at it to just be like a pass, like they're looking to find good content to share. So I think that's a good experience. And it shifts kind of, you're going to use it anyway. How do we use it in a way that educates, that inspires, that motivates? And it's really changed the dynamics of how we use tech in our house.
That's fantastic. Nate and I both do gratitude with our kids at the dinner table as well. And it's such a fantastic, really that's why you guys are like, oh, connect.
We're kindred.
We are. We absolutely are. What are 3 mind-blowing or crazy use cases for generative AI that most people haven't heard about?
This is hard because I always feel like I'm in a bit of an echo chamber where everyone's heard of everything. One of the things I will tell you is a new tool that I use, HeyGen. HeyGen has this concept of an instant avatar. And the instant avatar, 2 minutes of me recording myself talking, it's able to not just synthesize my face, but also synthesize my voice in 2 minutes. Like that's,
wow,
in my mind, a little bit, I mean, it's scary and exciting, scare-sighted. But it is an interesting, so that's one thing I think is something that most people don't realize. And I remember even 7 years ago thinking I wanted to build a Noelle bot that I could have tell my kids to wake up. And now that I have one, I'm like, oh, that's kind of creepy. I don't want to do that. So, but I think it's important for people to see that. Another, really interesting use case I find fascinating is in the space of healthcare, that now we're using artificial intelligence to detect patterns in brain activity. So now they're using biometric detectors that sit on top of the head as a crown, and they are allowing people who have not had use of their legs to send biometric, meaning they're not like typing it in or saying it. They're just sending biometric signals to the machines on their legs and allowing them to walk. And it's like
we showed this video at our keynote on Saturday. We were just as mind blown. This is crazy.
Amazing. And then cognitively, so that's like to do physical stuff. Cognitively, I was part of a project called Project Emma, and it was again using algorithms to detect patterns in the brain that would cause Parkinson's or stutters or tremors in the body. And there was a watch basically that you could put on, and it wasn't a watch. It was like a watch band kind of thing. But they used like Raspberry Pi technology in the POC. Like it was fascinating, but you put it on and it would detect the tremor, send a signal to the brain, and the brain could stop the tremor. So it was continuous. So it allowed this woman, and you can go look at this on YouTube if you want to search for Project Emma, but allowed this woman for the first time, she was in her 30s or 40s, and for the first time ever, she could write her name, and she was a designer. So imagine being drawn to art, being drawn to design, and never being able to draw a box or her name. And by the end of this project, she was allowed to draw her name, and you see her like extremely emotional. Like, I've never written my own name before. And you're just like, ah!
Wow.
It's amazing. And so these are the types of things that just like, more of that, please. Like, this is technology, of course, that can be dangerous and can hurt people. But for goodness sakes, it is improving people's lives, and it is changing like the integrity of people's lives in such meaningful ways. We should lean into understanding a lot more of that.
Wow. We are the disrupted workforce, and we always ask a question about disruption. We're 3 years into massive disruption. AI is certainly one of those, specifically generative AI. What does the future of work mean to someone like you that is on the bleeding edge?
Oh, goodness. I actually am a bit, it maybe echoes some of the things we talked about already, but I was part of a team at Miami-Dade College here in South Florida where we created a brand new program. And this program was called the Applied AI program. And I was one of the loudest voices in that program to create a program that did not require all the mathematics that is needed when you go into a scientific, domain. And I would fight, and literally it was like argument, like very high level arguments with the mathematicians who were like, oh my gosh, no, you need trigonometry and you need this and this. And I'm like, you really don't. Like, I am a practitioner. I didn't do any of that. I use it every day. You don't need it. Like, let's figure out what you need, not what you wish they had, not what you think they need. And here's a funny thing about bias. A lot of people think I did it this way, so you should do it this way. Like, I know. And so, but that hurts you on the others. Like, for me, that's exactly how I think. But my mathematicians are like, hey, I had to take 2 years of math in order to be good at this. So everyone else should take 2 years of math. And I was like, we're not doing that. So I fought for it. Anyway, that program is now launched. And they were hoping to get 50 people in the first semester. They got 300. Like, it was super exciting. But it opened the floodgates to a demographic that did not see themselves in technology, and ironically are desperately needed in technology. Like, those diverse voices, people that come from different places that are not classically trained at Ivy League universities. Like, these are the people that are going to bring humanity into the technology. And there isn't really very many on-ramps to that, especially if you were raised in a family that said girls aren't good at math or girls don't become physicists. Like, that was what I was told. Like, I wanted to be a physicist in the 9th grade. And my teacher was like, I mean, you could play around with it, but like, that's not the thing you're going to do. I was, okay. Like, I didn't even know to argue. So we have to, how do we create more on-ramps for people who care about this technology because they read a book, like a science fiction book or something? How do we encourage them to go down that path? So I think the future of work is really going to be creating more divergent ways of getting into this space and celebrating that diversity at scale on some of these much larger software teams.
Noelle, looking back, you have accomplished so much. What is new and next for you this year?
Oh, yeah. So I've got a couple of new things. One, so last year I did a lot of speaking on stages, but this year, one thing I didn't have, which everybody who gets on a stage has, and you guys are probably doing it as well. Everyone had a book. So this year I'm writing a book. I'm actually working with Wiley, the publishing organization. Most people in my field know them, but huge, huge opportunity. But I finally need a book.
Is that Wiley GPT or?
Let's just get Wouldn't that be awesome? But actually, it was really interesting because the nice thing about me is, like, I've been saying the same thing for decades, right? So it's not like I'm 4 months in and I'm using GPT to generate my content. Like, everyone knows what I say. It's just a chance to codify it into a vehicle that I've not used before. And let's face it, I mean, I personally have always wanted to, like, write a book. It's like a thing. So I'm excited for that. I'm also going to be at South by Southwest in Sydney, Australia this year. I'm also going to be at a conference for startups in New Zealand in April and May. So I have a lot of really cool opportunities to share this broader than just like the world I've been in so far. And that's what I'm really excited about. And of course, the iHeart AI community, which we are launching like right now. It's happening. So excited to have a chance to talk about it here on the show.
We heart Noelle. It has been amazing to have you on. Really. Such a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
So
it was my pleasure.
People, there are people that we meet in life who are a powerful force for good. And we love all of them. You are special. You are doing your thing and bringing this huge heart at the exact time we need it. At a time when there's a lot of concern about this new technology, you are the powerful voice for AI saying, hey, we can make a more inclusive world. We can break down bias barriers. We can create a community that fundamentally changes the lives of people who have been in very difficult situations for a long time. And you're bearing that message, inviting everyone to come along with you. It is powerful. It is inspiring. And we are so grateful to have you on the show.
Yay. Thank you so much. I couldn't have said that better myself. It's exactly the hope I have. Thank you.
Noelle, where are the best places for people to find you and learn more about your work and connect?
I always encourage people to connect with me, like for reals on LinkedIn, to connect. Don't just follow. You'll have to go to like the little 3 dots and connect with me so we can actually message back and forth. And then, of course, I will mention our new community. It's at school.com/iHeartAI, all spelled out. And that is the best way because I'm live in that community all the time. We're about to start, in the month of February is iHeartAI month. So I do content every single day in there about what I learned, how I did what I did. I mean, I always like to tell people, like, I am not classically trained in generative AI. Like, I just learned it. I just happened to learn it 2 years ago. And so I can accelerate. I turned my, years into days for people. And it's extremely fun, very rewarding. And like you said, a lot of people walk away feeling inspired and motivated in a time where we're kind of surrounded by fear and disappointment. So I hope to be that for some of your listeners.
You certainly are. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. If you found this video valuable, please share it with one person who you think would be inspired. That's how we pay it forward. To hear more of our top voices in the future of work, check out the playlist above. Be sure to click subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow our podcast on Apple and Spotify. Remember, all this disruption is a gift, and we're here to help you prepare, navigate, and thrive.